Hey, friends, connoisseurs of fantasy, the realms over, and curiosity seekers. You find yourself once more at the Port of Dark. Thank you so much for spending your time with us, and we appreciate the ongoing support. It has been quite the journey. Today, I have the inestimable pleasure of having the man, the myth, the dragon, DragnaCarta. Hello, DragnaCarta.
Hello. Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. He and I have been in conversation via DMs, and he has already shown himself to be both brilliant and delightful. So I'm really looking forward to getting into this. Um, would you, I guess to start off, because our faraway friends may not be familiar with your au revoir, would you like to kind of tell us a bit about what you're known for, or at least how I encountered you, or whatever you like?
Sure. So, I guess to start at the relevant part, around in 2017 or so, I started playing Curse of Strahd, and I wound up finding myself on the r/Curse of Strahd subreddit. I noted, along with many other people, that there are substantial flaws with the module as written.
Mm.
Eventually, over time, I would learn that Wizards of the Coast very often does not put out entirely playable content. And I started posting there, just my own thoughts and experiences running it. And eventually, over time, this took the form of what I called Curse of Strahd Reloaded, which was a compilation, at least at first, of my own advice, experiences, design modifications, guidance that I had received, that I had seen on the community elsewhere that I was compiling. And over time, it gradually morphed into a more thorough revision and set of guidance for how to run the module in a more in-depth and streamlined sort of way to really kind of
Mm.
tell a specific story. I wound up finishing the first iteration of that sometime around 2020 or so, 2021, and a year or
Oh,
so later.
it's
Yep.
early. Is that
Oh yeah.
early? Okay.
Yep. A year or so later, I think it was Christmas Eve of maybe 2021. A friend of mine, Twy, who I worked with in other capacities as well, Curse of Strahd related. We started talking at around midnight. I think it was Christmas Eve about a number of thoughts we had on Curse of Strahd, and it wound up sparking an hour or two long conversation about all different ways we could re-envision the module. And so I wound up revisiting Reloaded for the next 5 or 6
Wow.
months, rewriting it from scratch,
Wow.
to with a both to implement the concepts we talked about to address a number of questions and problems that still remain that Reloaded hadn't fixed or addressed, but also to do something that I'd wanted to do for the past 2 years, which was make a truly ready to run out of the box campaign for DMs that required as little work as possible with as much narrative quality and fidelity as you could possibly get. And I wound
Mm.
up launching it in May of last year, 2023. So yeah, the conversations would have been in 2022 then.
Two. Mhm.
And so I've been calling it affectionately Reloaded, as the members of my Patreon have used the name as well and taken that up. Um, I started with a GM binder PDF for the new guide. I wound up migrating it to a website, strahdreloaded.com, and now it's just uh, it's a my goal to rewrite Curse of Strahd, not to try to inject my own ideas into it, but as I like to say, what I feel the campaign would look like if it had been properly play tested and edited before it was released.
That's really
So
clear. That's a really clear, I guess, mission statement.
thank you. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think one of the things that I've learned the most in both writing the original, but even more so, writing the revised version of Reloaded is just uncovering and deepening my understanding of narrative and game design principles in general. Something that I've been working on for my Patreon, and something that I plan to release publicly once I have a better idea of how it's taking form, is something I've been codenaming the DMG Reloaded, Dungeon Master's Guide Reloaded,
That's
which
great.
is my vision of a DMing textbook, which talks about fundamental principles of narrative and game design so that DMs can actually know the fundamentals of how stories and games work instead of memorizing thousands of tips and tricks from YouTube channels. You know,
Wow. Dragna, one of the core principles of the Darkport project is better stories make better humans. And there was a whole presentation I gave at Gen Con. There've been a whole bunch of videos that I've done on this, and then obviously innumerable conversations about how the the hobby, to me it's an art form, but how the hobby is evolving and how the stories that one can tell now were impossible. I've been at this a hot minute. This is year 40 now for me GMing. And when I started, the stories that you could tell back then were much more limited in scope and even, dare I say, depth. And one of the reasons I wanted to get your truly expert opinion, and I'll get to that too, why I think it's expert, why I know it's expert, is because in 1983, this little thing called, Ravenloft just kind of exploded on scene. And I can tell you, being quite active in the gaming community at the time, that was a first. Like, there really was not an adventure like that before. And I'm not just talking D&D, because I was playing just about every game that there was to play at the time. Maybe a little bit after, but I mean, just about every game there was to play at the time. So I definitely want to get into that. My first question, though, and then we'll dive into like Curse of Strahd specific stuff, is, for me, I wanted to ask you, what space does gaming writ large occupy in your intellect and in your psyche?
That's a deep question. That's a fun one. Okay, so I think when I was younger, I always envisioned myself as a gamer, quote unquote. As I grew older, I came to realize that maybe the label didn't fit me quite as much as it does others. For example, my husband, who I adore, but among his many endearing flaws are that he plays League of Legends. He plays many other games, but League of Legends is predominant among them.
It's a flaw. It's an actual flaw.
Yeah. He's described himself as someone who plays games that make him hate himself, and he does this by choice.
That's wonderful.
But his repertoire of games is much larger than my own, and definitely I've always been the kind of person to choose a game and then dive into it indefinitely. And as opposed to just kind of picking games up, the new release is coming out, here's the mod, here's the expansion. Right. And I'm actually, relative to a lot of other D&D players and nerds and DMs, woefully undereducated in that space. For me, I think, obviously there's a sense of gaming insofar as kind of solo gaming as, kind of a method of relaxation or storytelling. Absolutely. Or enjoying storytelling. As a medium. But I think in general, for me, the thing that really draws me to video games, and part of the reason why, as an adult with a job and a life, I can't play as much as I used to, is the call of mastery. And the idea of really fundamentally understanding how a game works, what skill or craft is required in it, and really understanding that at a fundamental level, and where you can't find it, innovating or exploring until you can. Games that offer that are very, very interesting to me. And I think that's part of the reason why, in general, I'm actually, depending on the context, I can be either, somewhat bored with D&D or fascinated by D&D. I am a DM's worst nightmare when I am on the other side of the screen, because I am... I will spend 5 minutes thinking up the perfect way to suspend, a jar of oil and a burning torch above a doorway so that the bandit walks in, they get set on fire. Like just this idea of like figuring out exactly what I can do in a system and abusing it, not in like, the coffee lock sort of I'm trying to bully the DM sense, but in the sense of unlocking what's possible.
Yep.
And that's one side of gaming for me. The other, in the context of D&D and DMing specifically, is the performance aspect. Not in the sense of self-expression. I like to tell people that I don't have a muse. It's true. It's a debilitating condition. I've lived with it since I was a child. It's very tragic. But the idea of entertaining and pleasing other people in a social context, of helping them have fun, as Matt Colville puts it rather famously, I'm a river to my people. If my players had fun, I had fun. That to me is part of the greatest draw that collaborative gaming like D&D offers.
It's
and
huge.
So for me, and you can kind of see how those would play together.
Yes.
And actually that intersection of wanting mastery but also wanting to entertain leads to the obvious conclusion of, well, how do I master the art of entertainment and the science of entertainment? So that's been a big fuel for me to develop a lot of the concepts and foundations that I've used to try to improve and develop Reloaded, and really having the opportunity to have my work be used by so many people and get feedback from those people has basically, it's almost like I'm entertaining their players, which A, feels really, really cool, and B, intensifies that feedback loop so much so that I've been able to accelerate my knowledge and my growth so much more just by interpreting what I've received from that community. It's been invaluable, and I've been so grateful for that opportunity. So
Oh my
I guess if you
gosh.
boil it down, that's a bit of a lengthy answer. That is gaming to me. It's mastery and it's entertainment.
No, it's a deep. No, it's a thorough, nuanced answer to a deliberately deep and probing question. Thank you for that. I actually, I already know if you don't get sick of me by the end of this interview, we're going to have more conversations than this, because there's that that speaks to me on such a profound level. What you just said. Um, one of the this may seem digressive, but if you'll indulge me for just a second, was thinking about a lecture from decades ago that I had from a particularly insightful professor, and he was talking about how the way that we encounter things like the Iliad and the Odyssey is not the way that they were encountered by their intended audiences, because these were oral traditions, and so a master storyteller would get up and in those days he largely would be telling the tale, and they would read the room. And so if someone was really interested in Achilles, in Achilles' duel with Hector, for example, then he's going to add extra material to it on the fly. So the ultimate improv, right? And go. And then if they were much less, interested in what was happening with, Briseis or, King Priam or whatever, then that was all going to get truncated. And we think of them now as these like set in stone classics. Those are like, bedrock to the Western canon. But actually, the way that people experienced them and were, to your point, entertained by them was fundamentally different from how we in the modern world consume them. So it's really fascinating to me that you would just so clearly draw that link between a call to mastery, which is a beautiful way to phrase that, along with the idea of entertainment, because really. I don't know, it's funny to me, this is just coming because I've like read so much of your stuff now. You're really like pursuing the finest tradition of that storyteller, like true, like old, like you want to talk about old school, we're talking like ancient Greek storyteller. And you may not, I have a fairly useless degree in history, so I think of myself as an armchair historian. I'm kind of writing some things right now about that, but it's there's like a larger context that you and your ilk in a good way like exist in.
That's fascinating. I actually didn't know that about the I mean, I knew that Greek storytelling was an oral tradition, but I didn't realize the recognize with the implications of that. And I think that actually
Absolutely.
kind of exposes a very significant point, which is that storytelling at its core is at least to me, and like I understand and I sympathize with, and I'm enthusiastic for the drive to tell a story that one feels driven to tell for their own sake, as a means of self-expression. But to my view, and as insofar as that tradition of the storyteller, stories are not for the teller but for the listener. And I think that a fundamental flaw
Mhm.
that a lot of adventure publications had, to bring it back to the D&D context, is that they design for the teller and not the listener. They design for the DM and not the player. And so
Wow.
one of the principles that I've tried to take is
Mhm.
that, and this has informed a lot of the work that I do. I've developed this concept called NPC resident, for example. It's just a name that I gave it. I have a bad habit of coming up with random words to name things because I can't think of anything better. But the concept of resonance to me is what emotions an NPC inspires in a player out of character. Not in-game, not,
Right.
that you feel bad for the king, but does this NPC make you laugh? Does this NPC make you cry? And to me, that is the cornerstone, the crux of what a designer should think about, because our target audience as game designers are not the ones who will run the games, but the ones who will play the games. And I think
Yeah.
that's something that is so often and so easily overlooked.
It was, and one of my later questions was going to be about how you honed in on your advice on Reloaded, and Curse of Strahd Reloaded is really it's rubber meets the road. It's not pie in the sky kind of. These are some principles that it's like, here's the character. This is what we're trying to achieve with him or her. This is how you do it. And I thought that was it's just it would have been incredibly useful. I was when I started this gig, DC, I was like just groping in the dark. There was like literally nothing. You might get a paragraph here or there about how to run a game, but it was all trial and error, and you had to intuit things, and you just had to grope. And I told you in the PMs that I thought that you had done just the community, the larger community, a huge service by taking a beloved, and I've struggled to call it a module, campaign setting, adventure, whatever, because it's in this weird, it's like in this a novella linked thing. Like it's not a full-fledged campaign, but it's also a lot bigger and more in depth than a module to me. But you've taken this and you've like said, this is how you can actually run this in a satisfying, also mechanically balanced way.
Yeah, honestly, I think I mean, this might surprise you. I am a fundamentally very lazy person. I do not enjoy spending
don't
large
believe
amounts
that.
of time prepping my sessions.
I
And
don't
so
believe
I will put, well, okay, let me put it this way. I will happily spend 2 minutes of work to avoid doing one. How does that sound? Does that make more sense?
that okay.
Yes.
That's fair.
So for me, Reloaded represents that frustration with the inefficiency and the need to put in that work every week to figure things out. And I think in general, one of the things that we don't entirely appreciate is the fact that DMing is 4 roles, not one. I like to call them the designer, the performer, the adjudicator, and the manager. The manager is, you can call. I've pejoratively called it the babysitter. It's the one who brings orange slices, the one who hosts, the one who schedules, the one who settles disputes. The adjudicator is obviously the one who settles the rules. Do you hit? How far can you jump? But the thing that many that the hobby as a whole tends to conflate is the designer and the performer, and in the sense that a lot of the time advice that focuses on improvisation or modules that decline to fill in the gaps often interlock the two in a way that forces the DM to be the designer at the table, or gives the DM an incomplete design and forces them to complete it on their own. And to me, one of my priorities in writing the revised Reloaded was I want to offload the task of designer entirely. The DM can do it if they want to, but I don't see a reason why they should have to.
Interesting.
My goal, both with Reloaded and with my projects following when it's completion, I want to turn D&D into a hobby where a DM can roll up to the table, having done 0 reading, 0 prep, and just play the game like they'd play Yahtzee, or Risk, or Monopoly.
If
they want to, they don't have to, but I think that should be a choice that
Right.
people have. And right now, it's not nearly accessible enough.
No, it's not. One of the things, I'm working with several younger GMs right now, and I want to really intelligent, truly talented individuals, and there are always 2 games that I want to run them through, and one of them is Champions, because Champions is still, in all my experience, the best. It forces you to reckon with the idea of actual hard mechanical balance and why you do that. It's the best I've ever seen. I think you would find it endlessly interesting, and probably dig at the mechanics of it and dig at the math of it. And it's kind of funny to get into these esoteric debates about various aspects of it. But once you jam that kind of thing and you run through it, it's like coming back to something like 5th edition, and then specifically Curse of Strahd. And I promise we will get to the adventure on the nose, but is how wackadoo this stuff is. Like the infamous old bone grinder situation. I'm reading that and I'm like, this is batshit, man. This is like, especially in the era of the protagonist, which I at least want to touch on, because you're a powerful voice in your generation, and I really want to kind of at least get your thoughts on that. And I've been in this gig long enough to kind of see that evolution from struggling adventurer to protagonist. But yeah, and it's not to your point. It's just it has some very weird, and I looked at this, like Chris Perkins. I mean, he's the official, I believe he is still, as we have this conversation, still the official GM for Wizards of the Coast, right? I believe Chris
I believe he's still their lead story designer, at least at the moment. I don't know if that's how long that's continuing in 2024. I read somewhere that maybe he's not their lead designer. I don't know, but I know that he's certainly been the head, at least through the 5e's history thus far.
Yeah, I mean, and he's like the fate. Like when you're a GM, if you're a young GM, you're like, who am I going to go to? And this guy should be kind of, like my idealized version of a Supreme Court justice. Like, this person should be one of the most intelligent, well-educated, and deeply steeped in the art form person out of the entire nation. If you were the recognized GM head, like you were the GM for the premier role-playing game in the world. You really, and I'm not saying I'm not saying he's bad or not talented or whatever, but it's funny because I was watching when they ran Curse of Strahd. I think it was the same year. I think it was 2016 when it came out. And by modern standards, the sound quality is pretty challenging, at the beginning. And I was kind of going through those, and I'm like, wait a second, he changed that. I'm like, hold on, that's not the encounter,
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, this is the guy who headed the project, DragnaCarta, and he's changing stuff.
Yeah, I think that speaks to a broader issue, and this actually might be a good segue to the protagonist discussion you were mentioning, because not D&D and TTRPGs in general are more of a medium than a game in themselves, and so as we know from experience in literally any other gaming platform, not every game is for every player, and I think that there has been an over-reliance on encouraging DMs to tune the games to their tables instead of making products that are targeted at existing specific audiences of players. And I think that's a real gap that has left a lot of DMs and playgroups disappointed and led to unnecessary conflict, where DMs rely upon modules that they rightfully have, understandably have faith should be runnable out of the box for their playgroup. And because they don't have the expertise or experience or knowledge or time to tailor it to their individual needs, things wind up becoming more complicated and creating more work or stress for them. And I think ultimately that's a problem that needs to be resolved, because not every game is for every table. And ultimately, I do agree with you that if you are producing content, everyone's got an idea. What matters isn't the inspiration. To quote or paraphrase a quote that I saw in an article that someone linked me the other day, if someone comes up to me and says that inspiration is the cornerstone of the most important part of the work, I immediately realize that they are not familiar with the art form, because execution is ultimately what matters. And so much of what these products do is they provide inspiration without execution. And I think that's incredibly important if your goal is to curate and create an experience for your players in a certain context at your table.
Absolutely. And there's a whole discussion about the rules engines of a game, and specifically how you fine tune it for the campaign for that particular table. However, how that's the physics of the game world. It's running. It's kind of an engine that's running in the background, but it colors everything that you do. Everything.
Oh, sure. But I mean, even beyond that, if you look at something, a physics engine like Source Mod, for example, which is a game engine that's implemented in a number of Valve's different games. But the games themselves, despite using the same physics engine, are all very different products targeted at different audiences and different experiences. And so D&D to me is the source engine. The implementation of it, depending on the campaign or even the flavor of the campaign, is, the Portal or the Left 4 Dead or what have you. And I think that's something that a lot of people overlooked, because D&D is an engine. It is not a game. At least in my mind. That might be a hot take.
No, that's a really interesting way to approach that. I don't normally have anybody to geek out with on this, but thinking about all of the numerous changes that I've made to kind of rules as written for 5th edition, it's all toward setting using the physics of the game world to set a certain tenor. And so, like with Darkeport, with the current one, we're telling a pretty dark war story. And this is also another thing I wanted to get into with you about Curse of Strahd is I've seen you. I feel like in the era the protagonist has kind of shifted over one thing. I'm going to be running it as like a pretty straight Gothic. It's like Cthulhu where you get to punch Cthulhu in the tentacle at the end. So like I'm running it in a really with a different tone, and I think the table will enjoy it. I don't think one is better than the other either. I just know what I'm going to be more comfortable doing, and kind of what the brand of Darkeport is, a bit more gritty, a bit more high stakes character fatality, that kind of thing. But it's no, it's like you take these rules and you're like flavoring them in a or even more than flavoring, you're like really changing it. So I think actually I think this is a good there are too many dialogue branches, Dragna. See, this is the problem. There are too many dialogue branches. I don't know if you ever did play.
We can always come back.
That's true. Like right, it's you actually get to go back in it.
Yeah, unlike those other ones, we can save scum.
Because and not feel bad about it, like doing it
exactly
on Void or something. So I guess I'll go back up to the top, because I really want to make sure, but kind of the promise of me and of all these interviews and all the non RPG streaming that we do is always that I tell our audience that I'll never waste their time. Fortunately, they indulge me, maybe too much. So I wanted to start with, and I will definitely get to Reloaded, but I wanted to start with, just to pull it back, what in your mind and in your heart makes Curse of Strahd so special, as opposed to all of the other myriad of adventures that D&D has put out in a 5-decade run? Because it captured, I'm telling you, this is sensation in 83 and 80, as in the early 80s when it came out. And I've just seen this continue, and it's like crescendoing now,
Mm-hmm.
So what there's some obvious answers to that, but I'm sure our friends want to hear you opine, not me. So what do you think?
Sure. So I've got 3 answers here, I think.
Okay.
Kind of a DM's answer, a marketer's answer, and a designer's answer.
A marketer's answer. Okay.
We'll start with the marketer's answer, because that one's fun. So something to note about Curse of Strahd is, as you said, it does stand out. It has a bit of unique niche, if you will. D&D's bread and butter is heroic fantasy. Generally high fantasy. You can take some forays into kind of the Avernus vibes, ascended to Avernus. Maybe you can occasionally go into kind of a cosmic vibe in some cases, but generally speaking, it's pretty bread and butter swords and sorcery fantasy. Curse of Strahd is unique. It is not fungible like the other adventures. If you've got Phandelver, you've got Storm King's Thunder, and you've got Tyranny of Dragons, they're largely cannibalizing each other's market share. Curse of Strahd, if you want a horror adventure, you go to Curse of Strahd. It is the only one in the market. It stands alone. So that's one point. It's got a unique selling point that the others don't share.
No, that's a fair point. Yeah.
Secondly, the DM's answer. It's got, in part due to the incredible community that's grown up around it. I am one among a very large group of people who have found a home amidst the Curse of Strahd community. It is exceptionally well supported. It is exceptionally well developed, not by the publisher, of course, but by the community itself.
The community, yeah.
This is in turn, it's not the best adventure, but it is one that has a very large support base. In part driven by the fact that it occupies a unique marketing niche. It has a larger audience. If you compare, say, in terms of subreddits, I believe it's the largest subreddit community. It's in the top 2% of subreddits. I believe the next largest is Tomb of Annihilation. That's the top 5%. The Curse of Strahd is about 10 times larger. There's something of feedback effect there, but it certainly is in part due to larger communities create better support for DMs. But on top of that, there's also the designer's answer. Curse of Strahd is unique in that it is a very contained adventure. It is not an adventure in which you will... It's marketed as a sandbox, and the raw adventure is in fact a sandbox to an extent, but it is not an adventure where, like, say, Storm King's Thunder, you'll be roaming across the Sword Coast. It is very self-contained, and you will revisit many of the same places over and over again. In fact, it's so self-contained that you'll meet the villain of the final battle within the first 3 sessions most of the time.
Yeah.
And I think that's very important in that it provides a very clear emotional investment. It creates a sense of familiarity. It creates a very deep resonance with the players. in so far as they are able to develop meaningful long-term relationships with NPCs, because something that a lot of people don't realize or recognize is that stories are not about plots, they're about people. And Curse of Strahd, unlike the vast majority of Wizards of the Coast products, is about people, not plots. It is about Irina and Ismark. It is about the Martikov family. It is about Erwin and Danica. It is about Van Richten. It is about Esmeralda. And it is very much clearly about Strahd. We don't care about Strahd because he has an evil plan to create a curse that will destroy the world and dominate things. I mean, that can be a part of it. In fact, Reloaded does incorporate that directly to create a sense of heightened stakes. But notably, Reloaded only reveals that in the final 5 sessions of what's overall a 60-session campaign. That's not the reason why we care about Strahd. The reason why we care about Strahd is that he has incredibly strong, long-term, heavily developed negative resonance, in contrast to positive resonance, which is amusement, endearment, sympathy, comfort, gratitude, that our allied NPCs inspire in us. Strahd inspires repeated and layered negative resonance. We hate him, we're angry at him, we're irritated at him, we are disgusted by his disdain for human life and things like that. And that relationship over time creates a catharsis, such that his defeat is so much more meaningful than any other villain's defeat in any other campaign. And that to me is a part of why Curse of Strahd has so much replayability, not by players, because I think the whole concept of adventures being replayable by the same players is a little bit silly. But it's replayable by DMs because they fall in love, like Strahd did, with Barovia. And, you know, ask any DM who runs Curse of Strahd, chances are good you'll find someone who's run it 2, 3, 5 times because they get trapped in the mists out of a love for not the story, not the plot, but the characters.
But the characters. And for me, I would add the themes, and I want to get to that too. The themes that it brings up. You're absolutely right, though, about the centrality of any art form to be effective has to move people emotionally. It has to touch them, or it's not. It doesn't impact you. You know, then it's just a pretty performance or whatever. That's a really beautiful. I mean, the marketing piece is you know, of course, true, but I think you've really put your finger on it. I think that's because it's clearly it is unique. Like it really is special. The level of passion, the level of creativity, and I haven't seen. I haven't, you know, I've read like a fair number of the 5e adventures, published adventures, not like, you know, Mad Mage and you know, some fun stuff with Waterdeep, but like there's nothing like it's head and shoulders, like it's not even close to me.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that in a large part of it is almost by accident. I don't think Wizards of the Coast necessarily intended for it to be this way. I don't know that this was foreseen. I think that it's most likely an artifact of the sandbox model. Not because sandboxes themselves are better media, but largely because in other adventures, the designers are so preoccupied with the narrative and the plot, pushing the players forward and ensuring that they just get to the next encounter, that they don't really take the time to care about the actual set pieces insofar as, you know, we're returning here, we're caring about these people. You know, the stories of Curse of Strahd are stories about people. And I think that that's incidental to what the designers were intending, but I think it nevertheless is a very strong reason why people resonate with it so strongly as a story.
You know, when you said artifact, DC, that I think that's right. And I think, you know, I think like the DNA, you know, of course, the DNA of Curse of Strahd is the Ravenloft module, and the Hickmans, like, they went out of their way. They wanted to tell a story about this tortured individual, about this depraved, tortured individual, and they succeeded. And then Curse of Strahd is like this massive amplification and build out of that, where you don't just have Barovia and, you know, the castle, you have a whole like world in miniature. So I don't know, that's you know, I've never actually thought about that. I'll have to kind of consider that. What, you know, like how much of it was just, that does explain a lot, how much of it was like a happy accident, and then how much of it was because, you know, and then how much of it was by design, because, you know, like we were talking about earlier, there's some points where I'm like, is it even the same I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't try. It's gonna make people think that I like, hate what was written. But like, there's some parts of it that are brilliant, and then there are other parts of it as written that are, yeah, that I'm just like, that's not how you would. That doesn't even seem like the same crew writing it. Like
Mhm.
balancing it, designing it, the logistics of it. Like all of that. I'll just say there are some weird creative choices in the stock.
My
In
God, absolutely.
There's some weird creative choices in it. Um, so I guess to kind of continue, thank you for that. I guess to kind of continue down that road, um, what do you think what do you, no, I guess you basically answered that about like what it does well, really. Is there any other amplification you'd want to give to like what the vanilla Curse of Strahd does well?
Well, I think the thing to realize about Vanilla Curse of Strahd is that it's defined for a very different player base than the one that we have today. It's actually very clearly an
Mm,
artifact of a
mm.
design team that didn't yet realize that they were going to be grappling with the audience that Critical Role and the simplified mechanics of 5e brought in.
No, it's true.
If you look at its bones and the way that it's balanced and designed, it's very clearly built by people who largely come from an older generation of dungeon design and adventure building, because those are different archetypes of players. You've touched on this aspect of
Hmm.
protagonists versus old school. If you want, we
Hmm.
can talk about that a little bit, because I think that's a very um, underappreciated part of how Raw Curse of Strahd was designed that a lot of people miss, and in fact, a lot of Wizards adventures.
Well, I mean, my next question was, you mentioned that you found it deeply flawed. So I guess, yeah, that is a good segue. And if we want to kind of talk about the maybe that it was stuck in this transition era, if you will,
Hmm.
um, that so yeah, when I um, thought, yeah, I guess I'll start there. What do you think are the what were the flaws that were critical, like that were so egregious that you said, you know what, this entire thing just has to be, it has to be remodeled from basically the foundation up, and I'm going to do it, and here's how I'm going to do it.
Hmm.
What was the point, if you know, or what was it that kind of moved you to that point about it?
So the absolute biggest thing is just product audience mismatch. The Curse of
Okay,
Strahd as it's designed,
I
and
wasn't
I, and I,
expecting you to say
I, and
that.
I, and like that's not what got me to revise it. Like I wasn't, and I do not, that's just the easiest term that I can use.
Sure.
When I started reworking on it, I wasn't thinking like, oh, I'm going to sell Curse of Strahd Reloaded, and I still don't. It's free. But like more in the sense of like it is a product ultimately, and the modern generation of D&D players are um, very different to the D&D players of the past that it's designed for. Curse of
Oh, yes.
Strahd is, well, let's start off with the top level, the Gothic horror label. Gothic horror can mean two things. It can mean a overall experience, and it can mean an aesthetic. The aesthetic, of course, including themes, archetypes, and so on, but it is ultimately aesthetic. Curse of Strahd, as written, is a Gothic horror experience. It is grinding. It is deadly. It is unpleasant. There are a few victories. There are a few friends. There are many traps. There are many lies. And it is altogether a very unpleasant experience. From your third session, you will have Strahd showing up and then showing up every few sessions thereafter, repeatedly, to crush you under his boot and laugh about it, and you can't do anything about it. This is a deeply unpleasant experience. The number of posts that I've seen on the Curse of Strahd community saying my players are apathetic, they're depressed, they're anxious, they're not having fun, they want to quit. Valaki in particular is a huge culprit of this, although not entirely, at least due to the concepts, because it becomes so embroiled in everything. But ultimately, something that I realized in writing Reloaded is that Valaki Raw has no win condition. Nothing you can do can ever make the town better. It is a bad town full of bad people, save for the Marticubs, and it's probably for that reason why, despite the book never touching on it, the most common ending for people running Raw is the Marticubs run the town. Why? Because they are the only sympathetic NPCs in the entire place,
Huh.
and there is no
That's
reason to care
mhm.
about the town or its people, other
That's a
than
good
them and
breakdown.
Father
Yeah.
Lucian. Um, Raw Barovia is a hopeless, dreary, unpleasant place with surprising encounters that come out of nowhere and immediately kill you or bully you, and altogether make for an unpleasant experience. That is not a bad thing. if that is what the experience you were looking to have. If you want a meat grinder, tough, challenging experience that is, it's not mapped out for you. You get to build your own story. You get to choose
Yep.
your friends as you will. You are invested in role playing to the point where you don't mind, role playing groveling before Strahd a few times before you hit level 6, where you're happy role playing the angst and the tortured experience and undergoing character experience. This is a rare kind of player, for the record. It's just getting a player who's willing to and enjoys playing through that harrowing an experience is rare enough, both in the modern era and previously. But to have a player who intersects also with the kind of player who's as interested and invested in role playing and character development internally, to go on that kind of internal arc and experience, this create this narrative of how these experiences reflect upon them, that's even rarer still. And this is a product that on a whole is not meeting the emotional desires and needs of the average D&D player 20 years ago, let alone today.
Mm.
And so that's the number one thing. And in
That's
general,
huge.
a large part of it, which is the narrative design, the lack of guidance, the combat balancing. You mentioned old Bone Grinder, the Night Hags there, the TPK risk.
I mean, it's
Those are
infamous.
generally, that is generally an artifact of, they tried to make a Gothic horror experience, and by God, they succeeded. But at what cost? That's the first half.
That's the first half. Do you want to finish laying out your praise list, or do you want me to?
Sure.
There are some points I agree, and there are some points I'm going to push back.
Oh, by all means. I know I am always happy to lay down a hot take and to just have a disagreement about it. The second problem with it, and this is immense and massive, is the organization. As a printed publication, it is atrociously published. The organization is terrible, and in general, it falls into a trap that a lot of Wizards of the Coast and in general adventure products fall into, which is what I call location-based design, which is focusing on building up a world instead of building up a narrative and gameplay experience. Okay, there is a room here, and there's a chest in here, and there are some bones inside the chest. Why does this room matter? When will it come into play? Curse of Strahd, I jokingly call a setting source book instead of a campaign, but really that's what it is. There is nothing happening in here. Even if you want to call it a sandbox, it's not really a sandbox, because sandboxes actually have stories. The only difference between a sandbox story and a more linear story is how many stories you have available and the number of ways that they can end.
Do you consider, just real quick, do you consider Curse of Strahd a campaign setting, or do you consider it an adventure?
I consider it a campaign setting that is dressed up in a trench coat and that goes around calling itself an adventure. I think that anyone who manages to run it as an adventure does so largely in spite of Wizards of the Coast.
Okay.
I think that it is a substrate that can be turned into an adventure by players who are willing to explore and do things within it, and who are actively willing to bite hooks and look around. I do not think that it is sufficiently well put together, and even if it were, it's not on a physical level of what ink is on the page and where organized well enough to be conducive to anyone looking to run it as an adventure.
No, it's rough. That has been, because I've never run it before, and that's been, and I like to get my arms around something, before I get into it, and that has been rough going, man.
Oh yeah, it's not like, I have approximately, when I was prepping for Twice Bitten, which was my actual play of Curse of Strahd, 100 rules is written, run for the Curse of Strahd Reddit community. I have 82 pages of Google Docs annotated notes going through every part of that. I have a 200-row comprehensive timeline of every year or month or event that happened in Barovia, cross-referenced, tabulated. This happened this year, bringing in segments from old lore where I needed to patch the gaps somehow, by implication. It is atrociously presented.
You're going to send all of that over to me, right?
Oh, you know where to find me. But yeah, it is not user friendly. Just as a publication that has been laid down on the page, the fact that I had to cross-reference 3 different places to find out what Casimir's backstory is unacceptable. That's not a premium product.
Yeah. Ooh, that's a really good one, because that's kind of a little bit important. I remember this, to that point, there was a question that the interviewer's name, I can't remember. He also interviewed you, but he was interviewing Mandymod, and he asked her, like, what is the organization at the end? I think it was a robust discussion. And she said it was like basically from east to west, and then he started pointing at all these discrepancies in terms of like how it's laid out,
Hmm.
like you said, ink on the page. And it got me to thinking. I was like, how is this laid out? Like what was it? Just random? Did they draw it out of a hat? Like past a certain point, like past the first couple chapters, it is all over the place.
Oh
Trying to
yeah.
find material
Castle
and
Ravenloft, the final dungeon is chapter 4.
yeah, no, yeah, I was thinking that. I was like, okay, anyway, okay. I mean, point taken. Like, there's definitely no pushback or argument there. It's as someone who very much likes his physical, you know, likes to roll analog. I'm sitting, I'm laying down on my bed, and my bedside reading has become Curse of Strahd.
Mhm. Yep.
So I can try to read that. I wanted to back up a little bit, and let me start with the points of agreement for sure. I think it's you speak really eloquently, Dragna, about that you as the storyteller, and I just because of the tradition I was raised in, I usually say storyteller, sometimes GM, but and there's a little bit of a difference, but that's kind of beyond the scope of this discussion. But as a storyteller, you really are. You do have a duty of care, and you do have a duty, just a duty period, to see to the emotional needs of your players. You do, at least, again, in my tradition. Not everybody would agree with me. That's how I approach it. Certainly with Darkport, we're telling a gritty, violent war story. There's no resurrection in the world. Essentially, there are war crimes that take place. It is hard, and obviously there was a careful discussion with everyone, both individually and as a group, before we started about where people were okay going. And I guess now we would there are different ways that the current generation approaches that. I have my own ways, but it's been so far so good. And in the Curse of Strahd, we had to go through that all over again because it's not my normal crew, right? It's a second table, and so we really had to discuss and there's a lot of, and I would say the things in Curse of Strahd are potentially more upsetting in some ways because they're so intimate.
Mhm.
And
Oh yeah, there's a lot
it's intimate.
Yeah. I have a lengthy list of trigger warnings in Reloaded that
I
is
saw
adapted from a previous post that I put on the subreddit. It's just
I read that.
the
Yeah,
number
I
of
read.
times that I've had people ask me, Dragna, how do I remove all of the child death?
Yep.
I could not count it on 2, 3, 4 hands.
No, there's a lot of that, and I had one player on the main table, on the Terra table, who said, I can do all these things, but I can't do dead kids, and I'm like, I got that. And so an entire species was invented as a stand-in for children, so that I could not elide over the horrors of war, but we didn't have that. Same thing with dogs, actually. So I totally get that, and I hear you, and I think I'll even go so far as to say it's wise that you hone in on that. I will say, if I would say two points of pushback. One of them is that, and I'll say that because I want to ask a specific question on theme, because I'm kind of the theme guy, as I've gotten older, themes have become more and more kind of front and center for me, even beyond characterization. We all start at plot. We all start at plot. But once you have earned the trust of your table, and that is a huge asterisk to what I'm saying, because I understand if you're doing a pickup group, if you're a professional GM, maybe if the players, even at our own table, some people have been gaming with me for a quarter century. Some people have never gamed at all. And they're only a year plus, a little bit more than a year now that we've been streaming into this journey with me. And I appreciate that I have not necessarily earned their trust to the levels of where the story could go. I feel like, though, once, when they see me responding, when they see me, and we always talk about it afterward, we kind of have some informal debrief sessions, because it's important for people to know. There have been some really intense, there have been some times where the camera stopped rolling, and one player in particular turned and they told me, that was really hard. I did it, and they did it well, and there's visual proof of it. But it was a hard, because it was a one-on-one scene for like an hour and a half, and it was in kind of, it was like an interrogation basically. Hard. It was hard, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And they did incredibly well, you know, on camera. But and without that kind of trust that person had in me, you can't run that kind of scene. And it was even harder because I was only really in the background DC. It was another player, an excellent player, who was running the antagonist, who doesn't normally play with us, you know. So that was, it was somebody known, of course, but you know, that was there. So I do think, like, and I'm running into this, you run into this in high stress situations when players really love their characters, when they're truly invested in the story. The audience too, by the way, because this is a streaming game we're running, and so the audience is like, you always have to have them in mind and have them with you. That you can go there, you can go places once you have that bond, and that understanding that there is a point to this, that this truly is in furtherance of the story, and it's not either some prurient interest or some sort of GM ego trip, you know. So that's kind of, I would say, I think there is a space for the old school stuff, but it has to come from a place of mutual respect and understanding, and like, we're going to, and the difficulty level, as you say, like the difficulty level of the campaigns that I historically run is quite high. Like, and I guess we're kind of segueing into the protagonist discussion. Like, it's understood at my tables that it is unlikely that everyone is going to make it to the end. And I try to be, and this is, I'm kind of out of step now, but I try to be the neutral arbiter of the world. I'm not really pro PC. The only game that I'm pro PC in is Call of Cthulhu, because that game is already dismal enough, and I don't need to pile anything on. I'm like, hey, you want to make an idea roll? You know, like, because I had the mechanic for it. It's like, you know, why don't you make a luck roll? See if the cultist gun jams. You know, like, I mean, just you kind of need it. And having said all that, and then I'll of course want you to respond. Having said all that, it's funny that you would specifically cite, I feel like we're in each other's brains right now, man, because it's funny that you would specifically cite Strahd showing up, because as I was reading through, I was like, this doesn't work. And I'm trying to run, I really do want to try to run it as close as possible to rules as written, without compromising, and sorry, this is going to sound pretentious, without compromising my artistic vision, you know, of my Strahd, and also the experience that we have an all-female table for this one, except for Justin, our producer, and it and a range of, you know, some who have gamed for years and some who have, again, never gamed before. And I kind of love that. I guess I kind of specialize in, like, I don't know, ambassador to the newbies, you know, like I love new players coming in and they try new things and they approach it. Like some GMs like dread new players, and I'm like, yeah, bring them. It's great. It's as long as they're willing to show up, as long as they're willing to be a little vulnerable, which of course, you know, it starts from the top. I mean, I'm a really, you wouldn't know it, but like, I'm a really private person. I'm an intensely private person, and it has been excruciating at points to go through some of these scenes, especially early on, because of my own real life, you know, war experience as a combat medic in Iraq. And a lot of these stories are coming from that place and based on it. It's why it's like, it's so important for me to keep the verisimilitude of war, of what that is actually like for the people going through it. Because otherwise I'd feel like I was, you know, dishonoring the memory of fallen comrades, among many other things. And it has been really hard. I mean, really hard. Like, there was one session where, God bless her, you know, one of my players, like, she knew that I was struggling, and she just like took the scene over. You know,
Oh,
she just
that's yeah.
yeah, I was like, I couldn't talk. Like I was trying. You know how you're the GM and like you're try to press through, and I was overcome and I was like crying and it was like, I'm not. I'm not. It's the closest. It's the closest. You know, it's like the closest. I was like almost to just like tapping out. Like, I'm sorry, guys, I can't do this. And so I'm getting emotional just even thinking about that.
I mean, that's what good stories do, right? That's what you said.
Yeah, you know, and it was this other player just this player coming in, and she was a GM. You know, she was like just charged into it. So, I know that's kind of discursive, but it no, it was a very good. It was a really good. Trying to think of the word. Go for it.
I'm blanking too. I mean, it sounds like overall it was kind of a. I mean, the stories that we tell aren't always easy to tell, and I think, you know, it's easy to forget that the experience itself is not always an easy one, especially given who the players are, who the DM is.
Oh, okay. I think I found that thread. Yeah, as long like, so for example with Strahd showing up, I wanted to make sure that every time that he was showing up, that it truly furthered the story, and that it really did bolster the narrative, the themes of the narrative, and that's kind of, you know, another topic I want to hit. But I knew that every time that he was on screen, I wanted to make it a big deal. I wanted people to really kind of have have some dread in their hearts, like it be ominous that this guy is there, and I didn't want him to be overexposed. At the same time, I also wanted to imbue him with what, you know, I don't know, maybe I'm again being pretentious, but like, I like to think that one of the hallmarks of my GMing style is a psychological depth and nuance. And so you get into this creature's head, and you had a whole thing about how like Strahd is a fictional character, not a real person. So basically, Strahd can be whatever you need him to be, which is of course true. Yeah, and just developing that character, not having him overexposed. I mean, the whole thing. And I guess I'll follow up about how you see Strahd as how he's fundamentally different as a BBEG than, you know, other analogs in different adventures. But
I mean, I think you put on a very important point, and honestly, sure. It's funny because you've almost one of the things you said there about wanting every appearance to further the story and the relationship and the themes. You've almost paraphrased one of my defining philosophies of DMing and design, which is no content for the sake of content. You know, it's okay to have inspirations and ideas, but every scene, every encounter, every arc should ultimately further the story that you're trying to tell. And, you know, there's a running joke in my Patreon Discord. People will yell at me or entreat me and say, "Hey, Dragna, I saw this post about someone who put a lake monster in Lake Zarevich in Curse of Strahd. You should put a lake monster in Lake Zarevich." And I say, absolutely freaking not. That is content that is unnecessary. It is not needed. I'm not throwing things in there just because they're cool. And like, nothing against DMs who throw things in there because they're cool. But ultimately, I divide DMing design into 3 stages. 2 of them, if anyone's familiar with, you know, kind of modern literary analysis, the concept of Watsonian and Doyleism, where Watsonianism is if I see Sherlock Holmes walk into a restaurant, and I asked John Watson, the character in the Sherlock Holmes series, why he did that, he would tell me, oh, because he was hungry. That is the Watsonian answer, the in-universe answer. It is the world building, the verisimilitude, the in-world justification. Why did Strahd show up? Oh, because he was bored and he wanted entertainment. Right. On top of that, there is the Doyleist explanation. And, you know, if I asked Sir Doyle why Sherlock walked into that restaurant, he would say, Sherlock isn't real. He doesn't want anything. He walked into that restaurant because I needed him to be present there for a particular scene in which, it was necessary for his presence to be there in order for him to notice that a cook was slipping into a back part of the kitchen at a certain point during the evening. And I couldn't do that if he were called to the crime scene later. So he had to walk into the restaurant. So I contrived that to happen. But there is George Nunes, or the Nunes Publishing Company, was Sherlock's publisher. And at least according to popular understanding, publishers are always chasing the hot thing, the trend, what they think the people will like. They're not really thinking about the mechanics of what the story needs. If you've heard about Hollywood film scripts coming back with 10,000 notes about this demographic wants more of this. Nunist design, as I call it, is the chasing of the cool thing. It is the content for the sake of content. It is a lake monster is really cool. I'm going to shove it in there no matter how it impacts the story. Now, this is very respectable at the beginning of the design process, when you don't know what story yet you're trying to tell. This is what the Hickmans did when they thought to themselves, we want to tell a story about a vampire because that story deserves to be told. That is Nunist design. But it's very dangerous later on when you think to yourself, well, what does a story need? It doesn't need stuff that you want to cram in there. It needs things that make the underlying mechanisms of the narrative work. It needs Doyleist design, not Nunist.
That's again a really good breakdown. I tend to think of it as like the internal consistency of a world, and it's why I agree with pretty much everything you said. I come at it from a slightly different perspective about I would like to design a Strahd that is robust enough, internally consistent enough, has enough psychological depth at the beginning that he does what I want him to do without me having to change anything. I will if I have to. But when I'm really on my mark, DC, I can make characters that are close to 100% consistent in universe, and I love that. That's one of my special. That's one of my little. I get to pat myself on my back when I don't have to have anything change. But of course, in the end, the characters have to serve the needs of the story and not the other way around. The NPCs, I mean.
Yeah.
Okay. Can we talk a little bit about theme? Are we good?
Bring it.
Okay. So I design everything these days and have for a long time. My writing, my fiction writing, my nonfiction writing, my GMing. Certainly would have done for the Darkeport project with theme central. So for our first campaign, Gold, Green, and Red, in the world that I designed in Terra, because I wanted to just be, it's just a world. The themes that I went with were sacrifice and the indomitability of the human spirit. And everything that is in that world revolves around or touches upon, in some way, shape, form, or fashion, it furthers those themes. Now, of course, other themes have been incorporated because you're not there alone. It's not a solo project. In this case, you have 6 other individuals who are all contributing their own creativity, their own in the old Roman sense, their genius, their generation of mind into this shared experience. And so we've had things like unrequited love. We've had things like the centrality of self-knowledge. We've had things like finishing your plate. These are all petty character flaws, like how petty character flaws can cause disasters. We've had all kinds of kind of mini themes or larger themes crop up. I'm looking at Curse of Strahd, and what I see, because of my own experiences, some of what I've shared on stream and some I have not yet, although I suspect one day I'll maybe when we're done with campaign 1, I'll kind of go into more detail. I'm very, for obvious reasons, I'm very reluctant to kind of indulge in war porn. But I was a combat medic for 1.5 years in a war zone, and with everything attendant upon that, and that forever altered how I see the world. The level of, I don't know, in a good way, like the gratitude, I'm really grateful now, and I've kept that, and I've tried to cultivate that as an internal practice. Um, and so the themes that I'm going to be exploring with our run of Curse of Strahd are control and resilience. So, and I have based everything like that. I'm designing the psychology of Strahd around that. I'm designing the dynamics, the Japanese word for it is giri, the interconnected web of social obligations and duties and relationships and unspoken understandings between people. I'm designing with the idea of control and resilience in there, and control in the sense of Strahd being this oppressive, almost godlike figure, you know, and to extend the metaphor, like the ultimate abuser, because he literally controls he is the land, you know. He's everywhere in a sense. He's pervasive. His energy, his soul, or what's left of it, pervades everything in this blasted, twisted land with Strahd zombies and rats and cultists, you know, living in normal houses. So it, you know, let alone the mists. So those are kind of what called to me, and I'm very eager, and my players all, you know, we had a great in-depth session 0. You know, everybody's like, yep, sounds good. And I asked, like, explicitly, everybody, think about your theme or themes. Tell me what you want me to include, because this needs to be a melange, you know. It needs to be a woven tapestry. What themes do you feel like, either vanilla, or maybe it's time to transition over to your own work, Curse of Strahd Reloaded, what themes do you think are just inherently there, or that you have deliberately, because you're kind of an organized, mindful guy, you're far more organized than I am, have you like deliberately woven into the threads of that tapestry? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I
Okay.
think that to the extent that, I guess starting with vanilla, I
Sure.
think to the extent that vanilla Curse of Strahd has themes, they're either one, derived from the excellent work that the Hickmans did in creating Strahd as a character, or two, largely incidental, and were not necessarily intentionally added to the setting or
Later on.
narrative.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that, you know, you could kind of draw some things out insofar as maybe the messiness of family, insofar as Davian's estrangement from his son. You could talk a little bit about maybe Ezek's relationship with the Volokoviches, Babali Saga's relationship to Strahd, Strahd's relationship to Sergei and his father. But even then, Strahd's relationship with his family is all derivative of the Hickmans. There's been a lot of interesting conversations that I've seen about, you know, how Strahd really is kind of a story of, you know, the propagation potentially of abuse, given that according to at least some lore, he was enrolled in his father's army at the age of 7 as a squire. And that has a warping ability on a person's mind, living through war for functionally your entire life up to the age of, you know, 40 or 50, from a very young age. And I think those things are very interesting. I think that they could be exposed further. Certainly, there are interesting things that you could bring in with Argon Vistolt and Vladimir Horngard and so on, if you wanted to examine those themes of war and how they shape a person's mind. I don't necessarily know that they are intentionally worked in there, but I think there's something that a talented storyteller or just someone who's interested in them could certainly tease out and focus on more.
That all tracks. Yep.
In Reloaded, because I wasn't really thinking about this in the original Reloaded, but in Reloaded, I very intentionally focused the theme on faith. Not necessarily religious faith, though that is a part of it, but faith as an anchor, faith in oneself, faith in one's friends, faith in the future. Occasionally, yes, faith in a higher power. But there's a core moment that I recently released. The arc is called A Shining Beacon. It's the end of Act 3 of Reloaded. And it is the moment when, as in Raw, the player is having retrieved the skull of the silver dragon Argynvost from Strahd's Castle Ravenloft. They return it and reunite it to his mausoleum. And in doing so, they light a silver magic beacon with his spirit atop the highest tower of Argynvost, the manor in which the Order of the Silver Dragon, an order of paladins, once dwelled, that Strahd slaughtered when he invaded Barovia and conquered it.
And they become corrupted.
Yes, and this moment is very important. The players in experiencing this, and I got to thank my patrons and pre-readers for really pushing me to accentuate this and writing the scene. It is a moment when the players see the faith that they have brought back to the valley. They have visions of every NPC they've encountered thus far, and they all look up and they can see the light from all across the valley, which is raw. It's visible throughout the valley, and it does bring hope and joy and good feelings to all who see it. That opposed Strahd, that is also raw. But something significant is the last person that the scene describes in Reloaded, who sees it, is Fiona Wachter. In the raw version of Curse of Strahd, she is a servant of Strahd, very loyally. Yep. She is ornery. She is unfriendly. She's willing to employ the PCs to do her dirty work, but they'll probably wind up killing her because she's friendly with Strahd. She's happy to work with his spies and his minions, and she's just generally an unpleasant person. Reloaded changes that. She is loyal to Strahd out of a belief that there is nothing better possible. She believes that he is an absentee landlord. She follows the faith of Ezra, the goddess of the mist, who in Reloaded preaches that there is nothing to be changed. There is only an enduring, ever-present now. You must bend like the willow and live to see another day. There's a quote in Castlevania at the very end, the Netflix series, that Isaac says, roughly quoting here, "This is how they get us. They make us believe that there is only tonight, an ever eternal now. They make us, and then tomorrow we wake up and do it all again. We never realize we always dwell in one long night. We never see what could be beyond that." And that in Reloaded is where Fiona Wachter is caught. She is not antagonistic to the players. She's willing to help them and be a friend to them. She's simply not willing to fight against Strahd because she believes that he cannot be defeated. He cannot be destroyed. And so she doesn't have the luxury of heroics and foolhardiness. She has to do what's best for her neighbors and her people, and that means paying taxes to the Lord of the Castle and paying homage and fealty to him, at least in principle, because she cares about whether or not the streets run red with blood when Strahd doesn't get what he wants. She has no faith, and the player's relationship with her over the course of the campaign relights and restores that faith. Her arc in a nutshell is the arc of the entire campaign writ small. All of the other NPCs go through similar arcs of restorations or ignitions of faith. There's an undercurrent of redemption as well, but faith is certainly a stronger theme. Redemption is probably the second most pronounced one. But,
I was gonna ask you how you saw that different from redemption, but I think you're explaining it really well.
Yeah, and kind of Fiona, she meets the players, she explains her philosophy to them. There's probably going to be some tensions there, but ultimately they're probably going to help her do what she wants, which is overthrow the current leadership of Vallaki, the central town of Barovia. And she's going to become the new leader of the town. She's going to persuade them, look, I'm not evil. I'm not going to start, sending people to Castle Ravenloft to die.
Right.
I'm just not going to antagonize Strahd intentionally. I'm sorry if that offends you. You can do what you want. I won't stop you. Just please don't involve me in your shenanigans. And then the players do something notable. They rescue her daughter and restore her daughter to her. Her daughter has lost her soul. She is functionally vegetative state, and the players help her restore her daughter. And for the first moment, Fiona Wachter has hope again. Flickers, embers, barely. But she starts to believe that things can be improved and changed. And this comes to a head at the end of A Shining Beacon, where, let me see if I can pull up the exact text of this, because when I was writing this, you were talking about, stories that make you cry as you're writing this made me cry, and every time I reread it,
really,
it stirs something in me. And this is the context, is that the light from the relit silver beacon lit by Argynvost's spirit is illuminating the valley, and every NPC is regarding it. Quote, "The light finds the dark and twisted rooftops of Castle Ravenloft, where Sasha Ivliskova, a vampire spawn that seeks only to see Strahd destroyed because she hates him and seeks freedom from her torture, her face twisted with the pain of sudden hope. It finds a lonely cairn amidst the Svalich woods, where Kavan being a spirit that, in Reloaded, broke the taboos of his people, conquered neighboring tribes, and generally screwed things up, lifts his head in remembrance and sorrow. And it finds at long last," and notably, we've already mentioned Vallaki. Fiona lives in Vallaki, but we're getting to her last. She's excluded from everybody else. "The light finds at long last the sagging doorstep of an old and tired manor, where Lady Fiona Wachter holds a trembling hand to her face as tears spill across her cheeks." That is the moment when, for the first time, she has faith. And that is what, to me, Reloaded is about. It's that one moment when This older middle-aged woman who's lived her life without hope, without a dream of a better future or a sunrise tomorrow, looks up into the light and for the first time believes. That's what it's about to me.
That's beautiful. That's really beautiful. Huh. By the way, I'm stealing Sagging Doorway.
I mean, I can't take all the credit. I'm fairly certain that Wachter House in Raw is described as like a sagging, slouching house that hates itself or something along those lines. But
They're so
it's a
good.
word.
Wow, Faith. Okay, no, that makes a lot of. I also feel like there's a shadow theme there or an undercurrent theme there of hope, like the whole discussion about about hope. Kind of like control, like with control, I thought about making the theme a little different and explicit and calling it power instead. But I specifically wanted control. But of course, control mandates that there's some power imbalance going on. So that's interesting with faith, because it's hope and faith have an inextricably intertwined relationship with one another, I would say. Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. No, that answers that. Wow. I'm impressed. I mean, obviously, I didn't think you were going to be caught with your britches down or anything, but that's like poetic.
Thank you. My patrons yelled at me. They were like, because the original thing I wrote was like a third of the size for this sequence, and they're like, Dragna, this is crap. Do better. I'm like, I don't want to. It's fine. I don't want to do it. And they're like, Dragna, and like 3 other people like, Dragna, do it again. I'm like,
do it again.
I guess if I have to. And then I did it. It was the most fucking beautiful thing I'd written, and I cried.
I'm delighted that you were moved. I really am. I mean, it's why we're doing this. It reminds me of that awful scene in Misery. I know this happens in the movie with Kathy Bates. I don't know if I've read the book, but it was so long ago now. But where she's like, "Oh, this won't do it all, Paul. You'll just have to do it all over again." Misery was buried at the end of the book, and it's like, oh, okay, like what am I gonna do?
Yep.
So that's do you, I don't know, I feel almost maybe a little silly at asking you this, but are you satisfied with everything? I keep wanting to call it Reloaded Squared. Sorry. But
whatever you like.
Are you satisfied with how, because we always have the project in our head, and then of course there's that awful translation process of getting it out of your head and into the larger world. Do you feel like it's basically what you wanted? Reloaded.
So there are two answers to this.
Okay.
Am I pleased with it? Yes, absolutely. It is so. I've learned so much since writing the original Reloaded. Just creating this and has made me an immeasurably better at the craft, and just forcing myself to confront the feedback and the experiences of how all these pieces fit together. Just by writing, I've learned so much. And I went back and rewrote the second entire arc of Reloaded while I was writing like the 13th arc, because I realized it wasn't working. I had to go back and fix it, and I've gotten so much positive feedback about the changes that I made to literally the second thing that I wrote for Reloaded. So in that sense, I'm very pleased with it. It's reflective of what I want to do with it. It seems to be doing its job insofar as delivering the play experiences that people generally crave.
I'd say clearly, yes.
The second answer, am I satisfied with it? God, no.
Really?
Because bringing it full circle, what I crave is mastery. And it is not... I can look back at things that I've written, and I can see things that I would do better now if I could go back and do them again, because I've learned since then. I can understand new concepts now, new methods of going about and approaching these things. And from another level, I know that I'm not done learning yet. I've mentioned to you previously that I think that the concept of narrative and game design theory are very interesting to me, and I personally believe that we stand at a precipice where the hobby as a design form, as a science, let alone as an art form, is incredibly young. to the point where
Yes.
I feel that there's so much low-hanging fruit to be gleaned regarding the intricacies of narrative and game design that I'm trying to work on with my DMG Reloaded project, and figuring out and really analyzing at a fundamental level what the forces are that drive narrative and game design. I feel like there's so much more that I have left to learn, and I'm sure that if you ask me a year from now and I go back and look at Reloaded when it's done, I will say, sure, that was good for 2024 Dragna, but my God, is it embarrassing to look back at it now? Because that's you. A year from now, I will always want to be better than I am today, and that inevitably means that I will never be truly satisfied with my work, because anything that I made 6 months ago is hopefully worse than I could have made today.
It just so well said. And by the way, that's one of the most enduring patterns of the greats, is the Japanese call it kaizen, but it's just this continuous daily improvement and this impetus, and not all humans have it, you know, that you just want to keep driving and you want to be better. For myself, I never want to do what I've done before, and I always want the next campaign to be better. There's a whole discussion I won't get into now about how difficult that's been translating, you know, having just been a home GM to a stream GM, because they are not the same creature. And how much crow I had to eat at the beginning, and even now, where it's, you know, where you just get, it's like if you have any weaknesses at all in any of the half dozen different like core competencies of a streaming GM, you will get exposed on stream. It will it will happen, because we are now living, for better and for worse, and you know, all of that, we are now living in the age of Mercer, and that it's and there's just a certain bar if you're going to be doing, you know, because Darkeport, like, we do the whole, you know, full grand table, full all in-person presentation, you know, all original music. But I have to brag on him every single time because he's too damn humble, by our Emmy award winning now music director Steve Curtis, who does all of that. You will never know, and he always gets embarrassed when I talk him up, so I have to. You know, we have a fantastic art director, John Smith, who has made just some eye-popping art that enhances everything that we're doing. You know, but it's like a whole, man, it's a humbling thing. And so no, I commend you that you just are refuse to be satisfied with good enough.
Thank you. And I think on top of that, like even on the Age of Mercer thing, insofar as the expectations for DMs, I do think that people underestimate how much they themselves can grow and how attainable it can be. I mean, I was this was a few months ago. I was having an argument with one of the members of my Patreon Discord server. You know, I said, you know, I think voice acting is important. I think voice acting is necessary, even if you're not a professional voice actor. No, I mean, even just to convey the character and the resonance, and the other member said, I don't think everyone can do it. I think it's a gift, it's a talent. You know, maybe if you have it, you can nurture it. But I don't think most people can't do it. And I said, give me an hour. When I'm going to drive back home, I was at a doctor's appointment or something. I was like sitting in the waiting room on my phone. Give me an hour. I will figure out how to teach this to you. And by God, I will. I bet you that I can teach you to voice act after an hour, like an impromptu, like workshop mentoring session. So on the way home, I made all sorts of weird noises to myself in the car. I tried to figure out, like, I know I can do like basic voice acting. I'm not like a professional, but like I can voice act, certainly. It's a skill that I've tried to develop. And I wondered, like, how do I do it? And I managed to identify some basics of like how I could try to replicate it. And then I came back, we took an hour, we had like 10 or so people pile in the voice chat. And at the end of it, that member said, I was wrong, you were right, I'm eating crow. I can learn to voice act.
I love it. No, I love it. I love it, DC. And yeah, I mean, that's like, I mean, you're empowering other people. You're giving them the keys to the kingdom when they realize that. And I think you and I both know that there are very few things, there are only, you know, very few things that lie within the human kind of purview that can't be improved with dedicated practice. Really, you know, almost any skill. And I understand, you know, you advisedly use the word talent, but actually a lot of things that look like talents are not, they're not innate. They're not only innate, you either have it or you don't. Like, they really are skills. They really are stuff that you just kind of grind. Part of Matt Mercer's, I think part of Matt Mercer's like genius is that he is almost preternaturally graceful on camera, and he makes it look like he was just, for the old Maybelline commercial, maybe he was born that way. I mean, just like he came out of Zeus's head fully formed, and of course he didn't, and he'd be the first person to tell you that. No, so well, good on you. Good, that's really good. I guess we're not going to get to everything, and that's okay. I guess this is a good point to ask you, what do you consider as a GM, because we haven't really talked about you as a GM, and I'm going to try to weave in one more question with Reloaded. So clearly one of your strengths as a GM is you understand, I would phrase it as you understand how to kind of make the whole sphere, and you're not just looking at it as these discrete pieces. Like, you're, even as at least to me it feels like, I'm a matrix thinker, so but I kind of detect a like mind here, where you're looking at, okay, what do I want to achieve with this? What are all the component and constituent parts that I need for that? And then you kind of manipulate the variables around. And one of the things that I thought was the strongest about Reloaded, and we alluded to this before, but was how you gave like specific actionable advice on how to run that. In that context, what do you think is what are your strengths as a GM? Like, do you agree with that assessment that I just laid out? And what do you feel like you really have on lock?
Oh boy.
Time to brag. I'm going to force you.
Oh, why would you do this to me? I mean, I guess going if you kind of break it down by those roles that I mentioned earlier, there's the designer, the performer, the adjudicator, and the manager, or called the manager, the coordinator, I guess.
Coordinator, yeah. That too.
I'll start from the end and work my way backwards. From the manager coordinator aspect, due to circumstances in life, I have had a lot of experience mediating, and so I'm very comfortable acting in the space where I can pick up on a problem, ask about it, try to figure it out, mediate between two kind of conflicting people, or maybe if I'm having a problem or someone's having a problem, figuring out a resolution and just sitting down until something can be accommodated. And just kind of in that capacity, really trying to key in and tune into what my players need and trying to deliver that to them. In the adjudicative role, I have picked up a lot of the rules, a lot of the mechanics. I can quote you random things, not perfectly, but in general, I like to think that I have a decent grounding in most of the rules. So now that 2024 is coming out, my God, that's going away.
That's
and
a whole
I'm start from ground zero.
Yeah.
But I like to think that I have a comfort with making rulings based on that idea of fairness. If I need to in the moment, I don't have time to research it. Just kind of getting a sense for what the players would feel is fair, but also what I feel is necessary, and trying to strike a balance between that. From a performer role, I love performing. I love getting in front of a crowd, a group of people, and just talking or trying to amp them up or agitating. That's come from a lot of practice. Like back in elementary school, middle school, high school to an extent as well, I was incredibly socially anxious. I was not a social butterfly. The number of real friends that I had, you could count on one hand. It's been a development process in adulthood and getting to a point where I feel comfortable talking to strangers, let alone trying to entertain them. But that's been a sphere and a role that I've grown very comfortable with, and one that I've actually grown to enjoy and savor the opportunities that I have for it. And not just, although probably in part because I am a incorrigible egomaniac who loves having a chance to talk in a soapbox. But that's neither here nor there.
And isn't that part of the beauty? Isn't that part of the beauty of gaming, that people can step into all of these different roles, both in real life, as like you're saying, as a performer, and then also fictionally?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's fantastic. I think that conveying those experiences is one of the great strengths of TTRPGs, and certainly D&D in that capacity, as we were talking about earlier, as kind of it's kind of a game engine through which different games and story ideas can be conveyed. And I think that's a real value. So the performance aspect, I very much enjoy that. I guess to point on that again, I do think my voice acting ain't bad. Going back to when I was a kid, I remember I was a fan of Yu-Gi-Oh! The Abridged series, and I would take great joy in emulating the ridiculous voices that the creator did. I could still do any of them on command to this day.
Your wayward
that
youth.
was, oh yes. But that was what got me started. So I'm not Matt Mercer, but I'm pretty happy with my voice acting skills.
I mean, few are. Mercer's a rough act to follow, and there's a whole discussion about that we could have.
Oh yeah, but from the finals point, the design point, this is easily the one that I am least satisfied with, in the sense that, as we talked about before, I think there is so much more to learn and develop here. But I think that I'm very proud of what I've been able to do, and I think that honestly, my design skills, if you were to ask me which of these roles I feel most of a specialist in, it would be the designer role. In kind of understanding how narratives work, how dramatic questions are formed and related to players or audience members, how they develop and evolve over time, how they contribute to tension and catharsis, how gameplay functions at a deep level, how agency relies on player verbs and how the game can accentuate or take away or add those verbs, how they can interact to create complexity, and how that complexity can interact with the sense of agency and gameplay.
I love that. I love that addition, by the way, how you had the verbs in there. That's, again, just actionable, excellent, crisp, and pretty original. And yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Like that's been the cornerstone of the DMG Reloaded project that I'm slowly working on.
That's
like
great.
Kind of breaking like the idea is that once a month I publish a handout at Google Doc, really, a sample of a hypothetical textbook, really breaking into a single concept in narrative or game design. I've published an article internally about resonance, which is the concept of, again, the emotions that NPCs make us feel out of character and how that manipulates us. Because, as I like to say, people, there's no such thing as players who go off and do their own thing and surprise DMs. There's just DMs that haven't manipulated their players enough. And so a key part of narrative design to me is manipulation of players in a good way to help them have fun.
Kind of, yeah, it kind of is.
There's a concept of tension, which relies upon the concept well known in the screenwriting community of dramatic questions. When X happens, can the protagonist achieve Y before Z? A sense of inciting incident, goal, and stakes, and how that interplays with another concept, obstacles, and how obstacles create gameplay through agency and choice, and the different kinds of choices, option choices, method choices, action choices. These are all different terms that I've just made up and thrown at things, and how that interplays, how that relies upon verbs. Last month, my publication was verbs, and how those interact in a gameplay context to create those choices. I could talk for hours about this. Now I'm developing a concept called reference frames, but this is also cool to me, and I think that there's so much fascinating things to mine here, where we've taken so many of these things for granted for so long as just kind of folk knowledge or familiarity or experience or tips and tricks, and we never interrogated why they work.
They're unexamined.
I think there are deep fundamental scientific understandings here, not in the sense of physics, obviously, but in the sense of these are concepts that we can reliably apply, and that if you take a new DM and you give them, let's say, an hour of training in these concepts, I would wager that they can write a better campaign, they can design a better session than a DM who's been running for a year. If you give them a full day, they can design better than a DM who's been running for 5 years. If you give them a week of education, they could design better than a DM who's been running for 10. I would bet a lot of money on that, because I think ultimately if we're acting as designers, we need to design smarter, not harder, and that leveraging these concepts makes the design work so much more accessible, instead of just gating it behind this concept of, just practice and get experience, you'll learn and how to tune it out soon enough. No, there are cheat codes and people deserve to use them.
Right. No, I mean that you're making a very powerful case for why Reloaded is important, because it's the first, as far as I know, and I've seen a few modules, Dragna, as you might imagine, this is the first time I have seen This is like when they took, so there was a revision of Top Secret, and they did do a psychological breakdown of the NPCs, but you like put that on steroids, and that was revolutionary for the time. You put that on steroids, man. You really like, here's the and it was good. It was really good. But like, you're like, here are the resonances, here are the verbs with them, here are the, I mean, it's like, here's their like basically I took that as like, this is how they function, and this is how you get them to function in this chronicle. And to your earlier point of it's not physics, that's true. I would say, as much as anthropology and psychology though are sciences, which I've also studied both of those, um, there absolutely is a science as well as an art to storytelling. I mean, yes. And one of the best players I've ever had at my table, Randy, who plays Marcus, he has an incredible intuitive understanding of like a 3-act structure, without ever having like formally studied it. And now we're in conversation about that, but I mean, it's like he picks up what I lay down perfectly. I mean, it's like when we're in sync, it's like a dance partner, and we're just we're going. So I hear the passion, and I agree with you. Like, I mean, because that is always, and like, if you're just trying to break the ice, I understand the approach of just do it and you'll get better at it. But I mean, it's like, so one of my other art forms is martial arts, and it's like, yeah, I'm not just gonna throw you out there and, okay, here's how you throw a side kick. Okay, here's how you execute an ogosh. It's like, no, I'm gonna break it down and I'm gonna show you step by step, and then we're gonna, there's a method, and different senseis have different approaches, but like there's a method to all of it. And you're absolutely right that when you said earlier that the game design is like, we're kind of on a precipice. I feel like I don't know, maybe we're like late 1890s or something, like we're in the late Victorian era.
Oh, honestly, that sounds perfect. Yeah, I would put it right there. We've just invented light bulbs, or we're about to invent light bulbs.
I was thinking like, actually, again, I told you you're in my head. Like, I was actually thinking about electricity, and yes, and specifically lighting, where it's like, we're in this transition, and we understand that we don't have to do all of the old school oil lamps anymore. Like, there are other alternatives, but what that looks like and how to make that effective and how to make that, and then the keyword you use there is accessible. That's the other thing that Reloaded does. And I'm going to keep heaping praise on this, because it was really, I mean, I was reading it, and I remember at one point just saying out loud, this is extraordinary. This is taking this is distilling down so much information and knowledge into a way that basically anyone can pick up and run. And I love that. I love that. And in the same way that, and I say this as a historian, in the same way that Matt Mercer doesn't understand that he's a historical figure, and historical figures, unless they're like, egomaniacs or, supreme narcissists, don't think of themselves as historical figures. They're just kind of, Rosa Parks did not know that we'd be talking about her, for the next century, probably, when she decided she needed to sit on the bus. I realized that was, coordinated to an extent, but still, like, yeah. Mercer does not understand what a titanic figure, how there's just been a sea change, after he and the Critical Role crew have come. You're still, and hopefully this comes off as in the way that I mean it to, like, with true appreciation and respect, not little bro energy. You're still like early in your career. I mean, so am I, but not so early. And and I can't wait to see what is going to unfold for you and what you're going to generate and experience in the next decade. I mean, it really, the 30s, they're a good decade. They're a great decade. You have all of the strength of youth. If as long as you keep yourself up and you are careful, you have all the strength and vigor of youth, but you have another decade of experience that you didn't have when you turned 20. And it matters, man. Like, it really does. It's data, especially for a brain like yours. It's data collection. It's pattern recognition. There's a level of wisdom that's there that wasn't there before. There's probably a level of discipline that's there that wasn't there before. I mean, it's a really good decade, and I'm glad. I'm now long past the decade, but I'm very glad you're entering it, and I think it's going to be wonderful. I really do.
Thank you. I really sincerely appreciate that, and honestly, we'll see what happens, but I'm excited to see what the future brings.
I guess as we kind of move into the end game of the interview, because I have a feeling that if you and I were in the same room, we'd talk until dawn. It'd be one of those situations. I have so many. I mean, I have got like 20 more questions at least.
I am a sucker for a 2:30 a.m. philosophical discussion. So
Oh yeah, no. I mean, I want to get exact.
you
I
can't
want to
trust
get
me
into
with those things.
I want to get into the how you see Brovia on a ethical level, on a spiritual level, and I mean, there's all and then we can kind of laugh at the economy or lack thereof, and how to try to make the agronomy situation sustainable, and then just kind of world design writ large. But let's see, which one do I want to hit? I guess I wasn't. Yeah, okay. I'll ask the quote unquote safer one first, because I want to knock that out. So, as written, and even and you go to some links in Reloaded to emphasize this. I think you're wise, by the way, in that session 0 to be like, hey, be open to emotional experiences. That's kind of how, to sum it up, that's kind of how I read it.
I will say that I can't take all the credit for that session 0 contract. A number of things are things that I added in there, because Reloaded, for those who don't know, it has a section on session 0 and really helping your characters integrate with the campaign. And part of that is a campaign contract that says, I agree that here's a list of like 15 expectations. This is how the campaign's going to be. For example, you're going to get loot in the form of relationships and knowledge instead of money and magic items, for example.
I love that.
And a solid third to half of that came from feedback from DMs who had problems with players who didn't realize some expectations were being set, and the DM came back to me and said, hey, Dragna, the session 0 contract should probably say this. And I don't remember if that was one of them, but it might have been one of them that I wound up adding, because players were not really investing in the NPCs and they really needed to, so I wound up putting that in.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you correctly said earlier, it is a story about relationships. Like Curse of Strahd does not work. It's not any of these. It's certainly not old school Keep of the Borderlands, where it's monster of the cave. It's just whatever cave system you go in, that's what you're killing, and like that. I mean, it doesn't. I don't know, it'd be kind of a miserable, empty experience, honestly, if there were no emotional connections. I wouldn't want to run that at all. I have no interest in running that. Yeah, and I have basically I have a video out there about how to resolve 70% of the fights at your table, and the takeaway from it is set expectations. Like it really is that important. It's like critical to any sort of long running game. Pickup game, that's a little different, at any road though, how do you, and I've read a whole bunch of different stuff on this, and I don't Justin, our producer, is also going to be playing Curse of Strahd, so I need to be careful here when we get it to the streaming table. I had my own solution, but I would love to hear, how did you, and I know you have a write-up in Reloaded, but like, since I have you here, how did you kind of strike that balance, or do you see it as a balance, of taking Irina, who is a central figure, and I think the idea of her being a PC is very interesting, but let's assume that you're doing a more traditional route. How would you take her as a figure and make her both central and endearing, which is a different thing, but central, but never such that she outshines the PCs without falling into the damsel in distress trope, which is very easy to do?
Sure. So there's a few parts to this, so I'll try to go through them in turn. So for those who don't know, first off, Irina Koliana has been a part of Curse of Strahd since, I believe, the original I6.
Yes.
She is Strahd's current and favored prey. She is the reincarnation of the first woman that he in his mind encouraged him to turn to vampirism. He sought to win her, quote unquote, from his much younger brother. He sought immortality because he thought that she saw that he was old and dying and ugly, and he chose vampirism to try to pursue her. She died rather than embrace him after he murdered her fiance Sergei, his brother. and she's reincarnated ever since. And Irina is the most recent reincarnation. And the original Curse of Strahd is kind of getting back to the roots of Dracula as a metaphor, this kind of sexual predator, this man this predator who preys upon young women, and certainly that comes through very clearly in the source material. So that's Irina Koliana. And in the original material, she's treated very disrespectfully, I would say, in which it's terrible. I mean, it's not as bad as older editions. Twy, a friend of mine who inspired me to work on Reloaded, we were chatting about Expedition to Castle Ravenloft, the 3.5 iteration of Curse of Strahd. And there's a line in there where if Irina finds the crypt that Strahd has marked out for her in Castle Ravenloft, and she's with the players when this happens, she, quote, throws a minor tantrum.
Oof.
Yeah.
Oof.
So let's not get into that. 5e is better than that at the minimum. It's got a high bar.
Yeah.
So, but the way that she's treated is she has very little character. She's an escort quest for the players, get her to a safe place away from Strahd, and then eventually her fate is, most of the time, the players wind up in the western village of Kresk, which is one of Barovia's 3 remaining settlements. There's a holy pool there where the ghost of Sergei, Tatiana, her original incarnation, her fiance, lives, Strahd's brother, and he says, "Tatiana, my love, come to me," and she immediately regains all of her past memories and says, "Sergei, my love, in life we were meant to be wed. This pool has called your spirit to me, and then let me come to you." And she runs into there, and Irina, as a character, functionally dies. Tatiana is reborn, and she vanishes into the pool, assuming the players don't stop her, which many do. And if they do stop her, she's like, "No, Sergei!" And he fades away, and she loses her happy ending, at least for now. And even if she never makes it to that point where the players don't stop her, at the end of the module, inevitably, the players beat Strahd, sunlight comes back, Barovia is freed, and then Sergei's ghost walks down out of the skies anyway and says, "Tatiana, my love, come with me." And Tatiana says, and Irina says, "You know me as Irina, but in life I was Tatiana. Sergei is my beloved. Thank you for reuniting our love." And then they walk up into the afterlife. And it's stupid. It makes a mockery of Irina as a character that the players have invested into, that they care about, that they form bonds with. And it turns her into this stupid... like
it's worse than
player. It turns her. Irina fails the sexy lamp test, is what I'm saying. Where if you haven't heard of it, it's inspired by A Christmas Story, where if the character's role in the narrative can be replaced by a sexy lamp, there's a problem. And Irina is a sexy lamp who is ultimately claimed by either Strahd or Sergei, and it's stupid and terrible. And even if the DM tries to put effort into her and build up her character, which is sorely underbaked in the Rules as Written module, there's a whole plot line involving her getting kidnapped in Vallaki, the central town, and the module has nothing to say about her in that. She just kind of is again the sexy lamp. It's horrible. So that is the baseline from where we're starting from.
It's pretty bad. No, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad.
So to start, Reloaded changes her character. It turns her into someone who wants to help her people but doesn't know how. And it talks, the Reloaded changes a few things. There's kind of a siege, there are refugees, Strahd has kind of punished the local village, her father's died, he's preying upon her, she's confused. It ultimately tries to make her a very endearing and sympathetic character. She is courageous in the face of adversity, she's afraid but she goes forward anyway. She cares for others weaker than her. She's is not kind to the party, she supports them, she's interested in them, she wants to know about their adventures, their lives. That's the flattery resonance that I call it. And so at a starting point, we are making her a character that is much more worthy of the player's emotional investment. The players will, I have to this date, since Reloaded hit Reddit and the broader internet, I have not heard of a single party not fall in love with Irina, which I'm very proud of.
That's really good proof in the pudding there, DC.
Thank you. And that comes from resonance. That is the power of just resonance alone. And beyond that, Reloaded tries to give her an arc. At the beginning, she goes to the players. She's an escort quest still, but as soon as they get to Vallaki, she splits off. She goes to start trying to take care of the refugees from her village that are sitting outside of the gates that have been locked out, trying to help and advocate on their behalf. It's only at the end of Act 2, there's a little bit of a side quest where, there's this guy in town who wants to kidnap her, as per Raw. He turns out to be her long-lost brother. Reloaded actually talks about the emotional implications of this, so she gets to go in a little emotional arc there. But ultimately, she's doing her own thing for the entirety of Act 2, while the players are in and around Vallaki. At the beginning of Act 3, when the players start ranging a field in Barovia, she says, "I've realized what I need to do to fight for my people. Let me fight by your side. I want to learn to do what you do." And I originally had precautions in mind for what happens if players turn her away. I've not heard of a single party turning her down. So she joins the party in that respect.
Okay.
Up until this point, she's been, kind of a recurring, occasional friend that pops up every once in a while. She hasn't been a permanent member of the team. But Act 3 marks the point where she is a permanent member of the party if the players will have her. So from this point, she kind of just proceeds, and she's just kind of a member of the party. She takes a bit of a backseat. The players recruit more allies. They meet Esmeralda, a monster hunter, and it's its own thing. But Irene is just kind of a member of the party. So the question then becomes, how do you deal with a permanent NPC that's integrated within the party? And I have a few rules for this. Rule number 1. Party NPCs should never initiate or conclude any important decisions or scenes. They can approach players to begin scenes if it's something that the player is interested in out of character. They can chime in if they might have something reasonable to contribute, if they want to add a warning or advice or context or lore. They should never be the motor or the hand on the tiller. They do not have the right. At all times when the grown-ups are talking, they should be seen and not heard. That is the player's responsibility and the player's right. The party NPCs are there to be helpful. They are not here to control. They are not here even to appreciably influence, to the extent where their influence should color the player's decisions in a way that would come through as the DM trying to manipulate them. They can say their piece if they have a piece to say, and then they should fall silent. And you have to balance this with a sense of, you have to balance the verisimilitude. They have to be acting realistically. There are cases where if the players make certain choices, the NPCs might leave the party or protest violently.
Sure.
Not, by taking up arms, but by being very agitated about it. But ultimately, if the players, and even in Act 2, if Irina will tell the players, let me come with you to beat this guy who wants to kidnap me. I want to help. And the players are like, no, we have to keep you safe. She's like, respectfully, you can't stop me unless you tie me up. Like, she's allowed to do that kind of thing where it concerns her own plot line and agency. But the NPCs should not be allowed to choose for the group. The players always have the last word. They can always tie up the NPC. They can always, in a metaphorical sense, they can always overrule. The NPC can always advise. They can make recommendations if the players ask them or if the DM thinks it appropriate. But the players decide what doors to walk through, always.
Well, I think you have a key point in there is having her be in a protege position, and having the players being the mentors. Like, that's a very, very interesting approach that almost anybody would understand in terms of like how the dynamics of that relationship could work. I really like that. That's an elegant solution to it, actually. That's quite accessible.
That's actually one of the reasons why one of the adventure's potential allies, Dr. Rudolf van Richten, famed vampire hunter, is the worst ally that you can possibly choose. Because this man is Batman. Yeah. He does, his stat block is terrible. You know how, if you look at the old lore, you know how he beats vampires? He doesn't beat them in combat. He once beat a vampire because she went out overnight. She had this well-defended tomb and crypt that had no doorways, no windows, only a tiny little hole that her mist form could slip through. And you know how he killed her? He plugged it up with wax before dawn, so she couldn't get back in. And so the sun rose and she burned alive, and he never faced her. This man has opinions, he has methods, he has plans, he works alone. And if you dare bring him in as a party NPC, he's not compatible because he will run the show. Whereas his protege, Esmeralda, who's a monster hunter, is experienced, she still has the capacity to listen to the players and work within the framework that they establish.
No, she's much more
judicious about it.
Judicious is a good word for it. She's a much more compatible. I think I largely agree with you. I was just kind of thinking about, anyway, there's a whole discussion about like pacing on stream and how you have to like plot hammer sometimes. It's one of my least favorite. It's one of my least favorite aspects of being a streaming GM. Is like there always has to be movement, there always has to be a pace, sort of thing. But in a home game, I 100% agree that in that way they are the protagonist. Like, as much as I've kind of ding that concept. No, and Van Richt. As soon as I was reading that, I was like, I don't know about this guy. Like, I mean, he's a great character. Yeah. He's a great character. But like, I was like, as an ally, probably not.
Yeah, agreed.
Probably not. Well, okay. So here's my last one for you. Before before I give this one, though, I want to get a promise out of you, DC, that if the stars align, and the planets are in a row, and I'm ever somehow running a vampire online campaign, or if you ever find yourself in Austin, Texas, I would love to. If you've never had that experience, I would love to immerse you in that world, because that's really, it's not the first game that I played. I didn't hit that until I was about 17, but it was the game that I kind of came of age with, as a game master, and it has a special place in my cold black heart. Vampire the Masquerade does. So I would, if it's ever possible and it ever lines up, I'd love to have you in a chronicle that I was running for that.
You never know. I'm honored by the invitation. Time is always an ever short supply, but you never know what might happen.
No, it is, and I'm heartened to know that it's not impossible to get a DragnaCarta to play in an online game. I mean, you were running it and you were doing it basically as experiment is too dismissive, but you were, it was something that you felt like you needed to do, and I totally get that. Who knows? Perhaps by the time that happens, you will have achieved a level of, however you want to think of it, that you won't have to. You can have a little bit of extra spending money time, as it were. So, one thing that I noticed about Curse of Strahd, and this is as someone who has just had to grind their way through, all of gaming and all of the, and I don't, make a big deal out of it, but when I started, it was basically all guys, and there were, like, I was the only person of color at a table, pretty much. Unless I was with my older brother, and then they, they couldn't get around us. And of course that shifted. There's a whole long, anthropological study you can do about how and why and the effects of that. And some people aren't too keen to it, and some people are embracing it, and everything in between. And certainly in Darkeport, we've had our own discussions about that as well. One thing, though, that really surprised me about Curse of Strahd, given when it was written and how rapidly things have changed, is how much queer content there is, like, even raw, and certainly if you look at any of the coding or implications of things, it's definitely there. And I was like, I was a little surprised, because I'm used to having to, like, read around the edges, and queer the text, as it were. If I don't think of it that way. I'm just like, what are some different ways that this could run? But, like, the fact that Escher is canonically Strahd's consort, and they don't dance around it. Like, he's actually, they call him a consort in the published book. Now, different people can take that different ways, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't know. To me, it's like significant. And then in vampires, there's a whole discussion about. I don't see them as really. They're kind of like sanguine sexual. I mean, it's like really all about the blood. At least the way that I ran it. But it's, and we're not going to have time to get into this, but it's bizarre to me that there are, like, 0 feeding rules in Curse of Strahd, when, like, feeding was a central part of Vampire the Masquerade, and very metaphorical, and it could be like all that stuff. How did you experience, like, did that stand out to you at all, or were you a little surprised, or maybe you're young enough that it was just like, nah, there's going to be representation. It's it's cool. Like, and a lot of people code Esmeralda as either being bisexual or being primarily attracted to women. I could see that. I haven't run her yet. I probably won't know until I, like, embody her. That happens sometimes. But what are your? I don't know. I like I said, this isn't as well formed of a question as some of my other ones. But did you encounter that? Did you experience that? Did that come up at all, or what are your thoughts on that?
Sure. So actually, just first, so while it's fresh in my mind, to your Esmeralda point, ironically, so in all of the NPC profiles that I give, in addition to resonance and all that sort of thing, I always give a list of inspirations of characters that should inspire them.
You do.
And
You do.
Esmeralda's inspirations include, for my Doctor Who fans, the lovely Captain Jack Harkness, the most chaotic bisexual you will ever encounter in
Yes.
many pieces of
Yes.
science fiction media. I have always conceived of Esmeralda in that respect. In fact, in every campaign I've ever run, and in Reloaded, barring player involvement, Esmeralda has and will continue to end the epilogue in a relationship with Irina. That has happened in every game that I've run.
Wow.
Yep.
Okay.
I actually just wrote a fun scene where we're finally starting the slow burn in Arc R, the Trials of the Mountain. There's a cute little scene where Irina's shivering in a cave and Esmeralda might share her blanket. But anyway, that's an aside. But it's a fun little relationship that I enjoy, exploring, and the players always seem to enjoy it as well. The broader question of the queer content in Curse of Strahd, it's certainly something that I've been very happy to see. I kind of came in age and era where there was kind of the shift, coming of age and era where Obergefell and so on was kind of, came in age and era where there was kind of the shift, coming of age and era where Obergefell and so on was kind of, slowly, emerging onto the scene. Definitely, it's not something that surprises me, but it is something that I know to be grateful for. And to that extent, I think that I am very grateful for, maybe not Escher, although I've had a lot of fun with him in a potential, love triangle situation where he has a crush on unrequited love for Doru, who might have a thing with Gertruda. I've made that up for Reloaded, but Vladimir and Godfrey, obviously it's not a very healthy relationship in Rules as Written, where Vladimir and Godfrey are
is another one.
Knights of the Fallen Order of the Silver Dragon. Where Vladimir is the commander who has surrendered himself to hate, and Godfrey is his former husband. And this representation of these two men who are very competent. They are very
warriors. Yeah,
they're warriors. Yes, and it's as someone who, as a bisexual man who doesn't necessarily always see himself represented in some kinds of queer media, it felt very comfortable to see those kinds of roles represented, which is not to say anything against, my husband loves RuPaul and all that stuff, and no such respect to it. But for me, it felt very, I was very appreciative of seeing those kinds of, queer archetypes represented in media. Nothing against Escher. I love Escher. He's my flamboyant blurbo, and I love him, and he deserves he deserves, he's a fucked up little guy, and I love him. But yeah, I enjoy seeing these characters pop up. Certainly Curse of Strahd was not the last time that they appeared, and I certainly know that they've brought in non-binary characters and so on in more recent editions as well. So yeah, that's a long way to say that. Yeah, I notice it. I'm not necessarily surprised by it, but I'm certainly appreciative, both in a general cultural context and in my own personal sense.
I love DC that you said I'm not surprised by it, but I know to be grateful for it, or I know to be appreciative of it. That's what a gracious on point way of kind of summing that up. So often, not so much these. I don't know. It's better now. It is definitely better now. But so often on the rare occasion where you would see any kind of that sort of representation in media, it would almost always be some kind of tired stereotype. I mean, really, you'd have somebody would be super flamboyant, and obviously nothing wrong with that, but it's that was everything, or it was the sassy gay best friend, or it was the serial killer. I mean, yeah, that's kind of, and the whole bury your gay trope, bury your gay trope, where your gays trope, where it's just yep, nope, he's gonna die by the end of this, by the end of the story. It's no happy ending for you.
Yep.
No, I was surprised, and the fact that it was just slipped in there, with the two paladins, it was just yep, this is how it is. And it's oh wow. Okay.
One of the most one of the most fun things that I get to see when I hear back from people who have been running my version of Argynvostholt, where it plays up their relationship more. There's a portrait of the two of them together. There's a pair of wedding rings hidden somewhere in the castle. Both of them have forgotten their relationship, as in Raw, but the players can kind of put the pieces together, and it is confirmed when they light the beacon. I've always enjoy seeing DMs come back and say, tell stories about my players realized that they were roommates, best friends even. The historians will speak of the long platonic relationship that they had with each other. It just kills me every time.
Oh, God. Sorry.
just literally today, I was reading a campaign story that someone's writing about it, and it's just, quote, my players walk in, see the portrait of, Vladimir's hand on Godfrey's shoulder, the rings that they're wearing under their gloves, and the player turns to another player and says, I bet they were roommates.
Wow. Yeah. I've had that. I'm laughing hard because I've had so many debates in a historical context, some even formal about that. So, okay, no, that fair enough. Do you have any? So, do you have any kind of like parting advice for people who are looking to? And we'll be sure to get your further projects in here too before I let you go. But do you have any advice for people who are looking to run Curse of Strahd, who want to, do vanilla or go to Reloaded, or like what would you have to say to folks who might be interested in that? Particularly, presumably the Darkeport audience, but just even the larger community.
Sure. So I'm gonna leave unsaid, use Reloaded. I made it for a reason. If you want to use it, go for it. But if you don't, it's not for everyone. Like, something that I try to make very clear in the campaign contract and in general is this is a game for a certain kind of player and a certain kind of DM. It is, some people have called it on rails. I try not to. I try to include as much agency and narrative choice as I can. It is certainly more linear than the rules is written sandbox. You could certainly say that. I'll happily concede that. It's very path dependent in that there is not really a lot of creative freedom for the DM, because let's say you want to increase the distances of travel time because you want to have the players camp on the road. Well, you just made 5 different quests impossible to complete because the timing is very precisely calculated and you didn't realize it. So now you've changed something, you've broken everything. So Reloaded is not a campaign for everyone because it is very precisely put together and it's creating a very specific kind of experience. And I freely admit that. But if you think it's a kind of experience you might like, check it out. In general, assuming that you have a good grasp on what kind of experience you want to create, I would start from the perspective of what experience you want to create for your players. One of the questions that I always, had from people is how should I have Strahd act? And for the longest time, I always responded, well, who is your Strahd? In your world, what is your Strahd like? And eventually I realized that this Watsonian question, this in-world question, was the wrong question to ask. Because Strahd isn't real. What he wants doesn't matter. What matters is what experience we want to create for our players. So my advice to anyone looking to run Strahd, or any adventure really, is start from the end. At that moment when the players have just killed Strahd, the climax is ended, the catharsis is released, what do you want them to feel? Think on that. And then work backwards from that point and every decision you make, every scene you craft, every NPC you run, everything should lead up to that moment of catharsis.
See, when you're now you're bringing this full circle to when I was bringing in the Greek storytellers, Dragna, because catharsis, I mean,
catharsis
that's where we get the
most
word from.
Important part of narrative and game design. That is why we play. It is the moment of emotional release. It is when the dramatic question is answered, when the challenge is conquered. And sure, the experience matters, but the moment when you sit back in your chair, you kind of wipe the sweat off your forehead. You're like, wow. Okay, people probably aren't sweating at their D&D tables, but you're like, you process, you take it in, and you luxuriate in that emotional response. Everything is leading to that, and I think if you start from there and work backwards, then a lot of the pieces will be a lot easier to fit into place.
That's really brilliant. That's really brilliant advice. That's really brilliant advice.
Thank you.
Okay,
it took me a long time to learn it.
Yeah, no, it's good, and yeah, I mean, you're right about the stock answer about Strahd, and at some point down the road, once I've really kind of gotten into the guts of Curse of Strahd, I would love to have a follow-up conversation with you about the central villain,
Mm.
and how he operates, and how villainy writ large operates in high fantasy, in gothic horror, in fiction, why it operates. I mean, just I'd love to kind of. You've obviously put a tremendous amount of thought into this, and you have some real depth in this, and so I'd kind of love while I'm in my own process with it, um, to kind of have that conversation. I feel like like I said, there are probably dozens of conversations we could have about various topics spawning off of this one. So let us know what is your upcoming. You have an upcoming event that you're
Yes.
doing. Tell us about that.
So something that I'm looking to do is a lot of what I've talked about today is kind of the concept of freeing the DM from the shackles of the designer role of so that Reloaded tries to do this. It takes away a lot of creative freedom, but a lot of DMs want to just sit down and play. And I think I have full respect for, and I have a lot of respect for the DMs who have these creative muses, these drives. I don't. Like, I am an editor at my core. I'm not a writer. If you sit, like, I have tried to write homebrew campaigns. I hate it. It sucks. Don't play them.
Really? Wow. Okay. We need to
I-
talk about that, sir.
I do not have a muse. I don't have ideas that I care about. They all look the same to me. But what I do enjoy is editing other people's work to make it functional. And part and parcel of that is I enjoy designing products, adventures that DMs can just sit down and run. My dream is to transform D&D into a hobby where you can just sit down and play, like, as I said earlier, like you're playing Monopoly or Risk or whatever, without any forethought or prep time or whatever. Just sit down and have fun with your friends. You can design it if you want to. You can do that if you want to, but you shouldn't have to. I want to throw open the gates. I want to solve the problem of people being scared of DMing, the shortage of DMs because they don't think they're creative enough or good enough. Throw that out of here. I want to create a space in the hobby where anyone can just sit down and play and just have fun without needing to worry about whether they're creative or smart enough, and just have fun with their friends. So to that end, when and as Reloaded concludes, which I'm hoping to aim to write the last arc around by February. We'll see if I can stick to that. I've blown through like 4 deadlines so far, but we'll see. I'm working with 2 other writers, members of my Patreon Discord, who I've known for a while. They've given a lot of good feedback on the guide, Reloaded, and their experience with my methods of narrative and game design, where I'm looking to work with them to launch a third-party publishing company, which, like Reloaded, wonderful. The goal is to make all adventures public for free, like Reloaded. It's just a website. The idea is you can just go on it, you find an adventure. Because for me, when I find a third-party adventure and it's behind a paywall, I don't buy it, because look, I've full faith and apologies to third-party creators like Cobalt Press and all that. I've been burned by Wizards so many times that I don't buy these books anymore, because I don't have faith that they'll be well-packaged, well-designed products, and I don't want to do extra work. I want to just sit down and run it if I'm paying money for a module. So for me, that paywall is the biggest issue. So what I want to do is create a space where people can just find free adventures that are ready to run, high quality, out of the box. You can just sit down and have a good time with your players. The code name for it right now is Dragon's Den Publishing. That might change. But that is the ultimate eventual goal, and we're hoping to launch sometime early next year.
Dragon's End Publishing?
Dragon's Den Publishing.
Dragon's Den, okay.
Unfortunately, as part of that, what I would like to do to make sure that all of our writers are being paid fairly is I don't want to run on the whole, hey, we'll publish things and maybe you'll get royalties, maybe you won't get paid. I want to make sure that everyone gets paid up front for the work that they do. Now, I'm going to, as the one who's developing and publishing and editing all this stuff, I'm going to do my damn best to make sure it's all up to par and of equal quality to what I would publish under my own name. But I want to make sure that they're getting paid as soon as we put it up, and not 12 months later when we maybe scraped enough together to pay them 2 cents per word. And paying writers costs money. Paying battle map makers costs money. So eventually the plan is to monetize by selling battle maps artwork. I've got a few connections with DM Andy, Caleb Cleveland, a few others who might look to contribute with that, so that we can monetize by offering the optional asset packs and to accompany the modules. But to get us off the ground, we need funds to actually cover that. So our team of writers, myself and the 2 others, we are putting together a Kickstarter right now. It is a trio of folk horror one-shots. It'll be launching on Halloween 2024 and be running for the next 30 days after that through November. There'll be 3. The goal is to make, again, 3 high quality, ready to run one shots that are just out of the box. You can just plug and play. We're gonna have battle maps with them for everyone who supports the Kickstarter. We're gonna, if we meet our stretch goals, we might have designer notes to explain how the adventure was designed, how our thought process were. Custom original artwork by our artist Caleb, who does fantastic artwork for Reloaded. He's fantastic, and everyone should check out his Patreon. It's Caleb is Drawing. He's beautiful illustrator, fantastic watercolor. He's actually the illustrator for the official ABCs of D&D book that Wizards of the Coast actually published. Ooh. He's fantastic guy, brilliant to work with. Everyone should check out his Patreon to support his work. But we want to be able to offer all those things with the Kickstarter, not only to create these fantastic adventures that we hope people can run very easily and accessibly out of the box, these 3 folk horror one shots, because somehow I wound up in this black hole of horror over the past 8 years. That wasn't intentional, I assure you.
And you're never getting out.
Very familiar with it. And the goal is to not only provide these excellent short adventures, but also to raise enough money, enough funds, so that we can pay our own writers, to pay the writers that we hope to hire as contractors to contribute their work, to create a platform where anyone who has an adventure can come in, and if we have the space and the bandwidth, we can work with them to develop the idea and publish on the platform and get them paid. And hopefully by doing the Kickstarter, we can raise enough funds to at least cover the first 3 to 4 months of what the publishing company would require to make these free adventures available to everyone. So it launches on Halloween. It'll be 3 one-shot adventures, one level 2, one level 3, one level 4. I'll be writing one of them, and I'm editing and developing the other 2, which are written by our other 2 writers. Tentative name for it is the Folk Horror Trio. If you're interested in supporting it, I'll be announcing it on my Patreon, patreon.com/DragnaCarta on Halloween. We'll be officially launching. It'll keep running. Hopefully we'll be able to get it funded and get it to everyone, so everyone can enjoy these adventures once they're out. It'll take a few months to finish the development process for all of them if we fund. But hopefully we'll have enough left over that we can continue the project beyond that and keep making these kinds of adventures, not just accessible to our backers, but the ones that we publish after that to the DMing community at large. So that's the ultimate goal. That's what we're trying to do. So hopefully we'll be at least somewhat successful with that.
Well, and what you're talking about is the democratization of tabletop role-playing games. I mean,
yeah, I want to make DMing accessible to everyone. Yes. I want to make the stories accessible. I want to help people share what they've worked on and have it developed and edited. And I don't have infinite bandwidth, but I would eventually like to turn this project into a curated space where people can submit for consideration, perhaps things that they've worked on. If they'd like to work with us, we can bring them in, on an independent basis. Pay them the fair market value of their work, because they deserve that, and share their work with a larger audience who wants and needs and deserves a chance to just run adventures and tell stories with their friends without putting in hours upon hours of work that they're not getting paid for. So that's the dream, at least.
That's the dream. So what I'm hearing is that we're not going to be able to game together for at least another decade.
We'll see.
That's what I'm hearing.
Once Reloaded is over, my schedule will open up. But my calendar seems to be a black hole in that whenever something gets freed up, 2 more things come in. So I'm very bad about that. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah, you made the joke. I mean, it happens with super organized, driven people. You made the joke about that you've been stuck in this black hole of horror. I never thought I would be writing. I would be writing romance novels, and here I am. Alrighty, well, that and I'm gonna volunteer. Corey loves it when I do this. I'm gonna volunteer our CEO services. If you ever want to sit down with a truly veteran, project manager, entrepreneur, businessman, and you have any questions about stuff, Corey's very good about saying, hey, I don't know this, but there is a lot he knows. He also knows just a ridiculous amount of people in spaces you would never think. So I will volunteer him for that. You guys can have that convo offline sometime if you like.
I would be genuinely very grateful to take you up on that. Yeah, I am not a naturally business-minded person by any degree. So
I have had to learn. I have had to learn so much, and it's a process. It's an ongoing process. Man, okay. I think we covered some ground, yeah?
I would think so.
Okay. Do you have some thoughts for some future conversations? Because I definitely do.
Absolutely. Well, you have my number.
I do. And thank you, by the way, for being so. I'm on this weird, ironically enough, vampiric schedule right now for reasons. So thank you for being just so supportive and really gracious in your time. I want to thank you for the excellence that you brought to this discussion and this discourse. It's not something I ever take for granted. And they're just it's hard work, like we're in the thick of it. I hope I hope I'm producing something of lasting value that's important to people. I know you're producing something of lasting value. I see that, just the tremendous response to it. I'm reading it myself. You're in a funny way, you're doing God's work, kid. So all right, well, I hate to say goodbye, but all good things and that. Um, I hope you've been entertained, DC. I know I certainly have.
Absolutely. This has been a very enjoyable conversation. So thank you again for the opportunity.
And for our and last thing, this is going to air on the 25th of this month. Anytime after that, or even that day, if you want to jump on our Discord and remind people about the Kickstarter, you have my full blessing to do that. And I think there'd be, like I said, we have some really sharp people in our community from all walks of life, and you might be surprised at the reception you receive.
I'd be very grateful for the chance. Thank you.
Awesome. For sure. You've more than earned it. Faraway friends, that has been our conversation with DragnaCarta. He is a prominent Redditor, and
Oh God, don't call me a Redditor, please.
Oh, is that bad? Is that a slur?
It's true, but it's derogatory nonetheless.
It's factually correct, but it's not really.
It's disturbingly, like, the worst insult that a Redditor can use for another Redditor is to call them a Redditor.
It's called a Redditor. Well, see, this shows my ignorance in all of this. But I hope all of you have had a good time looking at our conversation, listening to it, and as you go on your journey out there, take care of yourself and stay curious. Thank you so much, Dragna and friends. Fale.
Y'all take care.